Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the editor-in-chief at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler and Jewelers America's co-branded webinar series. This month's webinar is sponsored by the Gemological Institute of America. Today, Regina Ciarleglio and I are co-hosting a session titled 10 Tips to Keep Your Business Safe, Secure, Holidays and Year-Round. Before we get the webinar started, I just want to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of their screens. I will be back on at the end of the discussion to facilitate the Q&A. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday, November 15th. Now I'll hand it over to Regina to get the discussion started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and excellent job on name pronunciation. So I always love that. So today we have Aaron Steensma and we have Howard Stone. And today they're going to discuss a little bit about security during the holiday, which we all know this is the time to do it, right? So we'd like to thank them in advance very much for their time and what they're going to share. So first, Aaron, if you could tell everybody a little bit about your background and what you do, and then we'll pass it over to Howard.
Sure. Well, thank you. My name is Aaron Steensma. I'm president of a company called Fortified Castle Consulting here in DFW, or Dallas-Fort Worth. It's a business designed and dedicated to helping businesses and individuals prevent against criminal threats and attacks. So I take an approach of combining historical and current crime statistics and develop programs around keeping people safe and their businesses safe. My background is in law enforcement. I'm a retired police detective. During my time in law enforcement, I specialized in burglary, robbery, and theft. Really took an interest to the jewelry industry through my investigations, through a lot of burglary investigations, through 2020 all the way to 2024, prior to my retirement. So while I was in law enforcement, I was also working security at jewelry stores. So I have some firsthand knowledge of doing law enforcement security well on premise. So that kind of gives you a whole rundown of my background with law enforcement.
I guess you qualify. Howard?
Yeah. I do not have a law enforcement background, but I have a corporate security. So I am the vice president, Howard Stone, the vice president of loss prevention and analytics here at Jewelers Mutual. I joined Jewelers Mutual in January of this year, so about 10 months here at JM, but come with over 30 years of loss prevention and corporate security experience. Prior to joining Jewelers Mutual for the last almost 10 years, I was director of corporate security and loss prevention for Amazon in Seattle, and have an extensive background in retail, understand the brick and mortar side of the business. Joined Jewelers Mutual, and the team here is responsible for really three areas. One is doing things like this and speaking to the industry and educating jewelers on things that they should be aware of, looking for solutions that will help jewelers combat these types of losses, whether it be technology, hardware, and the like. And then on the intelligence side, really helping our jewelers and our partners out there look around the corner to see where problems may not currently exist, but where they could. And we work broadly with other industries or other entities, rather, like JSA and the like. So excited to be here and participate in this. Look forward to the discussion as well.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And I think we really got a good mix of speakers today, Michelle, because, Howard can definitely speak on loss prevention and Aaron can speak on security. And those two things that really go hand in hand. So I like the mix. So, all right. So I'm going to start with what are 5 things, and I'm not going to hold you to 5 things, but try and come close to it. But so Howard, from loss prevention standpoint, what are 5 things, or maybe what are the top 3 things? What are things that a retailer should be doing to protect their business? And it could be when the store is closed during non-business hours or when the store is open. So you could really look at it both ways.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think if I look specifically at the holiday time, well, let me speak year round. I think is having clear standards and expectations for your team, your store, your employees rather, and making sure that they are current, relevant, and up to date. And I'm speaking specifically around, store operational procedures on how you manage, your inventory, how you manage your cash going, whether it's being picked up, whether it's going to the bank, whatever the case may be. And then setting that expectation with your team to adhere to those standards. I think during holiday, that becomes even much more prevalent or important rather, is because in a perfect world, and I'm hopeful that this happens, but our foot traffic goes up, our sales increase, and in turn, the volume and the velocity of transactions go up. So many times, retailers as a whole kind of lose sight of the standard operating procedures because they're focused importantly on driving sales. So first, I'd say is adhere to our standards, or your standards rather. Secondly, around a holiday is when you're hiring, is really have a really high bar and you should have this year round, but in situations where you're hiring to offset increased sales, many times you hire people that are here for very short periods of time. And by the time whether reconciliation of inventory, whether it's whatever the case may be, you figure out that there's a problem, those individuals could be long gone. So you want to make sure that you set the standard and expectation from a hiring standpoint right out of the gate and hire the right people for the role that they're gonna adhere to, and they're going to comply. The other piece I think is more around inspecting what you expect. And we'll probably talk about this during the call later, hopefully, is what's happening in the world we live in the industry around crime. Many times we find out after an event happened that the system, the alarm, the cameras, whatever the case may be, it's not working to the expectation of the store owner. Now is the time, and it's critical to do this now, is to make sure that all your systems work at the level that they should be. Test your alarms, check your cameras, make sure that they're all functioning properly, make sure your call list is updated. All of these things are critical year round, but more importantly, as we go into the holiday season, because we know that while volume is up and while sales are increasing, that criminal element will expose itself more during those times of year, especially when your store's not open. So think about coming into Thanksgiving and when stores are closed. But I think if you take all of those areas and focus on them, then the last piece is really around engaging your partnerships outside of the four walls of your store. You sit in a mall, go walk down and meet the mall security manager or the director, whomever. Invite your local law enforcement. Aaron can probably speak to this around having, whether it be the crime prevention unit, the local police department, invite them in your store, show them around, tell them what you do, tell them the problems you're having, get them kind of engaged on the front end. So when and hopefully this doesn't happen, but in the event they have to respond, they know kind of what the store looks like. So I think those are a few, and I'm sure hopefully as we go through this webinar, we can deep dive in a little more detail into those, but I'll let Aaron answer if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Regina, did he get to 5 things? I lost count.
Yeah, no,
did
he didn't.
4.
And I think we got to give him a couple demerits on that, but they were good things. So well done, Howard.
All right, we'll give you a pass, Howard. Aaron,
So-
can you top Howard? Can you give us 5 or 6?
How about I'll try? I think that you raised some excellent points, Howard. Regularly testing and auditing equipment and quickly fixing it is going to be key. From working investigations, I can tell you that more times than not, we find out after the fact that equipment wasn't functioning. So I like that you hit that one. Partnerships is an excellent thing. I could tell you from working patrol to investigations, when you have an invitation to have a parking lot to sit in to write reports, or somewhere that you can just stop that you know is safe, it makes you want to go there more. So I would say really focus on inviting your local law enforcement into the area. In regards to a couple of different ideas, I would say I like the idea of removing all merchandise at night, and keeping your cases not clothed or cloaked, because it really shows people that are canvassing at nighttime that there's nothing to be had here. We see typically in law enforcement that criminals are canvassing about 24 hours in advance. Through some of our investigations, we have found that they're doing dry runs or, running through exit strategies, placing their counter surveillance out at night prior to, just to see where is law enforcement and what are they doing. I would also, during store hours, limit the amount of product that you remove while you're showing. I say one at a time is a really good number, because if somebody grabs the pocket or the place that you're holding and runs out the door, it's a lot easier to lose one than 10. Also, what we see is you need to lock your case when you're showing items. Criminals are really good at distractionary techniques, and while they're distracting you, you're turning around, looking behind you, they're reaching over the case and into it to grab items that you might not realize they're gone. And then that leads into situational awareness. I think that situational awareness is super key going into the holiday season and all year round. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't seem right, it's probably not right. A lot of articles that I read or news that you watch after, a lot of times people will talk about, oh, something didn't seem right or something was off. That's a perfect time to notify law enforcement and just have them come through the area. I could tell you that personally, I would rather go and just drive by a location in a squad car than I would stand on a pile of glass because an incident had happened. The next key to that is reading body language. If somebody's coming in, watch how they're communicating with you with their nonverbal cues. Are they looking for cameras? Are they watching the door? Are they looking for, their partners in crime to come in? So, and then my last
No pun
point,
intended.
yeah, that's right. My last point is going to be your cyber footprint. That's, I think, an under-mentioned comment, but what you put out online, these criminals are really watching. They're cyber stalking their targets prior to, whether that's a business or an individual, which is something that I can get into further, but further into the discussion. But that would be, monitoring what you and your family put on social media, and then your open source record information as well.
When you say cyber footprint, could that also apply to like, and I know maybe I'm just taking a wild stab out here, but here's a video of my store, right? When for the holidays, right? So I understand there's your personal side saying, we're going to a holiday party, but also, hey, come check out the store, and kind of do like a video on that. It's kind of like inviting, all the bad guys to really see what your layout is, right? And okay. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Howard,
Well,
do you have
I
something?
add a comment to that? And I think it's kind of a catch-22 here, right? Because if you think about the world we live in, and how social media, Instagram, TikTok, whatever the platform is so important. Matter of fact, I was in a meeting, I think last week in New York, and sat through a session around how you drive your top line sales with utilizing those. The lens that Aaron and I are probably looking through, maybe a little different around like, what's the potential bad things that could come out of that? And I'm not by any means, and I would hope Aaron agrees, like we're not proposing not to do that. We're just saying be more careful, or even more so if you're out at a show and you're like showing, online, hey, I'm going to be at this convention center on this day at this booth. That's great. But think about who you're telling that to, and how, the potential for you from getting from point A to point B, even traveling in between those 2 points, not just when you're there. So that's a tough one, but I think it's important to utilize those tools, but just think about what the output of that is for folks like Aaron said that are on those platforms for reasons that are probably not the reasons you want them to be on there for.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Howard. And that's always the rub for jewelers, because your business, you want to advertise what you have and advertise what you're doing. But unfortunately now with, as you mentioned, so much social media, which is so visual dependent, a lot of other people are saying it too. So that's I don't know, that's a hard dance, I think.
Yeah, it is.
And what about go ahead. I'm sorry, Aaron.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think a good solution to that is to implement the other things, having the partnerships with law enforcement, or hiring, security or law enforcement during the holiday season as you have an increase in your store, and then making sure that it's put away at night in a very highly rated safe. I think that can definitely combat some of the need to have the social media out there, and it can slow down and frustrate the criminals.
I see a lot of jewelers, especially at holidays, right? Like they might have a trunk show, right? Or they might have, so just for everybody, trunk show and certain manufacturers bring in a lot of their extra goods and, meet the representative. So
And
I
it's
see a lot of,
kind of a way sometimes for retailers to test if they want to bring in a certain designer
Yeah.
or brand.
But I do see a lot of retailers who do that. They also have like a holiday party. So like, they'll send invitations out or, hey, we're having something, blah, blah, blah at our store. And these are events that we know are going to be heavily trafficked. So if a retailer is doing that, what would your advice for them be? In other words, how to keep safe yet still keep that specialness of of these occasions.
Yeah. I think, when you're talking about special events like that,
Mhm.
my guess would be that it's a very curated list of folks that are being invited to these events. So you have, I think, an advantage because I'm going to invite this 100 group of folks that are maybe they're the best customers or the ones you want to drive into the store. So I think in terms of that and making sure that you keep it special and keep it. I think there's two sides to it, right? There's the
Mhm.
security side, which says, hey, I know these 100 people are coming. They're good customers. We're not going to let anyone else in because they're not vetted, whatever that looks like. But then I think on the other side, it makes that event even more special because it makes the people that are invited feel like they're invited because they are special and you're not letting the general public in. So I think with that example, from my standpoint, and Aaron, feel free to jump in. I think you're a little more safe given that. But the thing to keep in mind, like we just talked about, is if it's an invitation only and it's a private event, you're probably not broadcasting it on your social media platforms. But I would also encourage, and this is another dance that we need to figure out is, your customers that are coming to your store for these events are going to be leaving, with products. So you want to make them not scared by any means, but aware of, maybe it's a situation where they buy it and it gets shipped to them at a later date, through whatever the solution is. So just something to keep in mind. But from my perspective, I think, if you adhere to the invitation and you make that special, I think you're less likely to have an incident because the individuals that are in your store. If that makes sense.
Can I jump in here with a question, a comment and a question, with two questions? Number one, do you think then a snail mail into the invitation is better? Make it fancy. Don't send it out over email so it can't get forwarded. Does it matter? Number one. And number two, would this be the kind of situation, Aaron, where you would call the local police and be like, hey, December 12th is going to be my Christmas party.
Yes.
People are going to be leaving around 10 o'clock. Can you swing by as people are heading to their cars?
Absolutely. I would, there's two thoughts. I'll go to question number two. I would definitely keep your local law enforcement partners informed of what's going on, even just asking for what we call directed patrols, extra swing through the area, that visibility. One of the things that came to mind when you were asking this question is what I like to call invisible barbed wire that you build into your security strategy. It's the things that you can't see that will slow people down. And realistically, when I say people, I mean criminals, slow criminals down, but realistically, it's not something that your customers would feel, and it keeps them safe.
Can you give some examples of that?
Yeah, so having things like your security film, integrating technology into your security strategy, things like facial recognition technology that can notify a security guard on site that a known thief has come through the door. That technology is out there, and it's, again, that invisible barbed wire type of feeling. You can integrate that magnetic door to your entry point, and then build your security plan from the parking lot all the way to the safe and make it harder to penetrate each level. And people will feel that, especially criminals.
That's interesting. I think you kind of jumped ahead, but okay, that's great.
Sorry.
No, I think that's good. Yeah, no, we love that. So what are some areas, what do you think are like some areas that jewelers tend to overlook? And Aaron, I think you definitely hit on one when you said, make sure everything's working, right? Make sure your batteries, your cameras, make sure your camera isn't blocked, right? So what are some other things you think that you have seen in your experience that, jewelers have overlooked?
So one of the things that I would say is security is an ever-changing landscape. And I think that you need to continually follow the crime trends so that you can make sure that you're not, fighting crime with old technology. I would say that's an overlooked area. Howard covered the written policy. I think that's also an overlooked area in my investigations going through and, working with some of these stores. There's often not a written policy on how to respond to after hours alarm calls, or what to do during a robbery. How do you survive that, with not getting hurt and emotional damage that really comes with having that type of
Yeah.
trauma happen to you. So those are the two areas that I would say are probably overlooked the most.
Thank you. Those are great. Howard?
Yeah, I would agree with those, and I would go back on this test and validate and walk through. And these are not fun exercises, but they're necessary. I would much rather,
Right.
and you want to coach your team on how to sell and upsell and add items to the basket, but it's also important to think about the other side of that and run tabletop exercises with your team around how would we respond in the event of a smash and grab? What do we do in the event of someone coming on? I think Aaron mentioned around product and distraction theft. So all of these are real life examples that happen, unfortunately, every day in the world we live in. But using those as coachable moments for your team, and reinforcing that, so if you don't, it's like anything else. If you don't utilize that muscle, it's going to go away.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're utilizing that muscle as often as possible, especially going into this holiday season. Like I mentioned, you're going to have a group of folks in a very compact period of time. You want to get as much information to them so they can utilize it. And then throughout the course of the year, it just becomes standard work and practices how you run your business. So I think those are important to do as well.
Actually, that's excellent. What are you seeing in terms of how criminals are targeting jewelry stores? And Aaron, I know you said, a lot of times they're casing it 24 hours before it happens. At least from what you're seeing from your detective experience, and Howard, from your loss prevention experience, are you seeing that criminals are targeting areas? Is it inside of a mall? Are they freestanding? Is it nighttime? Is it are there some patterns that perhaps we can be aware of?
Yeah, so I break this down into two different thoughts. There's covert surveillance and overt surveillance. I would say that that's one of the biggest things that they're doing is their homework, right? They're sending someone in to canvas. They're targeting, they're qualifying you to see, are you a good candidate, based on, your social media, what they can find out there on the internet about you, and then also sending someone in. In regards to, is it specified to, standalone buildings versus, buildings that have adjoining walls? I think they both pose different and unique, security concerns. But are they specifically targeting one over the other right now? I think that they're more looking at, what is going on inside the store than necessarily where it is.
They're looking for the easiest target, whether it's a standalone store in a mall or in a strip mall.
Right.
In my opinion, yes.
Okay.
No, that's, again, interesting. Let's see. And Howard, do you have any?
Yeah. I can kind of put this in real world terms of what's happening in the industry today. And I'll use this phrase, and I'll come back with the supporting information. Like, it's unprecedented what's happening today with this criminal element as it relates to, I'm speaking specifically about crime that's happening overnight when your store is not open, and the safe attacks that the industry. And my guess is that the folks that are joining or listening, all you have to do is just go on the news and you'll hear about it, and/or just go to the JSA website, or you get the alerts, you'll see this. But this is happening today. And what I think Aaron hit on a couple points, I'll just double down on those. What we at Jewelers Mutual and JSA have determined that this is not specific to one geography. It's not happening in one part of the country versus it's nationwide. That's why I would say it's unprecedented. The technology of sophistication, and I'll use that word loosely, but the level of sophistication that the criminals are using to defeat what we believe to be tried and true security systems is changing and evolving. And I think we as the industry need to continue to elevate our game to match that level of sophistication on things that they're using, jammers, things like that we can certainly talk more about. And then that goes back to my point earlier multiple times around making sure that your systems work properly. And then you have a plan in the event that an incident happens that you can you can respond accordingly to meet law enforcement, to check the building, to make sure that all of the, that you didn't have a break-in, it was a false alarm, whatever the case may be. But and all this information is out there for public to read up on in terms of how, what's happening, how you can combat it. Happy to answer more questions as they come through on this, but I think it's important, like I said, to know that this is not just Aaron and I, telling you about things we think are going to happen. These are things that are actually happening in the industry today, that I think have been there, but not at the level of frequency that we've seen over the past probably 6 months as it relates to these overnight burglaries that are happening. And last comment on that, having the right equipment, having the right safe, having the right security technology is critical. And making sure, again, for the 5th time, that it works properly, because many times we found out after the fact that a camera had been offline for weeks and no one knew about it, or maybe no one did anything about it, and that camera would have been critical to identify individuals, or the alarm didn't function the way we wanted it to. So but yeah, I think it's important to talk about real world examples as well.
Can I jump in with 2 questions? I'm sorry, Regina, before we move.
Yep. That's
Howard, could you talk a little bit more about these jammers?
Yeah.
Explain exactly what is a jammer, how it can work, and is there anything jewelers can do to combat a jammer?
Sure. A jammer, if you think about, well, first off, having dual line, having line security, a traditional, line security, and then most alarm systems operate off of line security and then a backup, which would either be cellular. The Wi-Fi jammer or cellular jammer is basically what you would consider to be the old-fashioned way of clipping the hard line in the back of the store. This basically creates a noise in the environment, which disrupts the alarm. And from a Wi-Fi and cellular perspective, that's going to the central station, that creates a comm failure. And we've talked about this in other discussions, like what the alarm provider gets is communication failure. And in my opinion, when you're and I'll double click on this a little more, is that we should treat comm failures as a dispatchable event, meaning don't just, roll over in bed because the alarm company called you and said at 2 a.m. your system is in comm failure. Like, to me, that's a true indicator that there's a potential for the problem. So have law enforcement, you show up, or whoever's on your call list. So that is
in your mind, Howard, that's the equivalent of an alarm. That's the same thing.
Yes, exactly. Yep. I would treat that as if there was an alarm going off on your front door, right? And then what jewelers can do to combat this is make sure that, number one, they have traditional line security that's polling at a rate that is acceptable. And then, is there a technology today that will combat this? Not that we're tracking on, that will, what's the word I'm looking for? Defend us from this, but there is technology emerging that will create a indicator when a cell phone Wi-Fi jammer is present. And I know that the industry is looking for that because this is a trend that we're seeing emerging. So I think until that happens, making sure that you have the right standards, the right policies around response, testing, and then holding your alarm provider accountable to making sure that they adhere to your expectations of how you want to manage your alarms from a response standpoint.
And having your call, I'll just add this in.
Yeah.
Having a call list that's up to date, like make sure, if person A is on
100%.
vacation, there's a person B, C, D, somebody's going to answer that call. And if people leave the
100%.
company, take them off the list.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So one thing we don't cover a lot in these types of webinars, but it is important and it's unfortunate, but is employee theft and employee dishonesty. You had said, I think, Howard, that, usually around holiday, you hire a lot of, you might hire extra people to help. So what are some, and I know, a retailer might vet a person, as much as they can. But what are some things that retailers can do, especially when they have an unusual amount of new hires and things to actually, prevent, uh, out of sight, out of mind, but to prevent a lot of employee theft, because a lot of times, you're right, they won't find out about it till after the employee has left.
Can I take that one? Because I think my background in retail,
Is, yes.
unfortunately, I've sat across the table from many, many individuals that have committed fraud and theft and crime, and the common element is the reducing the amount of exposure. So if you think about, like, and I hate to say this, but the industry's created a lot of first offenders, meaning people that had zero intentions of coming to get a job at. Now, mind you, there's an element out there that gets hired with one purpose and one intent, and that's the fraud in a short amount of time. But most individuals come with every intention of working hard, earning, a paycheck, but there was an exposure or something was put in front of them that created them to think about things maybe that they would have never. So generally speaking, I would say eliminate those exposures. Think about what Aaron said around your product, making sure that you have really, really strong accountability on how you, well, cash is probably less transactional than it is today in the olden days, but you think about how your transactions are processed, auditing against that, looking for variances, doing perpetual inventories, and letting the team know that you're doing these, not because you don't trust them, it's because it's part of how you run your business, right? So my opinion is that we should eliminate those opportunities for individuals that may be thinking about it or may not be, but if the opportunity's in front of them, unfortunately, they're going to take advantage of that. And then, we could do great interviews, we could do background checks, what I would encourage you all to figure out what's right for your store. But unless we eliminate those opportunities as best we can, I think that takes care of a significant amount of that population that is going to come there and work really hard and do really well for you. And then you'll probably bring them back during the next holiday season. That's the type of things we want versus individuals who come there in a short amount of time, then they're gone and you figure out you just lost, So think about your store and think how we can, eliminate those opportunities any way that looks like in your environment.
Perfect. And, Aaron, do you have anything you'd like to add in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Howard highlighted the checks and balances excellently. Having the redundancy in your systems and how you operate is going to play for, very well when it comes to security and loss prevention together, whether that's building security or, the internal threat that is inside.
Right. Okay.
So,
and do you see a lot? I mean, I think maybe from your point too, Aaron, do you see it, or have you seen, is that a big thing, like employee theft?
And is it bigger too around the holidays when you're, your staff, et cetera, but is it bigger around the holidays when you're hiring extra hands?
Yeah.
Personally, I haven't seen it a ton in the jewelry industry, but that is just, I would say, compared to Howard, it's more of a limited exposure aspect. I have seen a lot of employee theft, but not necessarily as a detective in the city that I worked for with the jewelry industry.
All right. Okay. Let's see. So I think you talked a little bit about technology, right? So, I mean, are there any, as we know, we're all, AI, there's all this stuff now. How is technology helping fight crime and helping prevent theft?
Howard, do you want to go first? Or do you want me to?
You can go, Aaron. I can go.
Okay, so in regards to how it's helping, I mean, it's giving you the heads up that you didn't used to have, right? It's integrating, having systems to integrate that can tell you that something isn't right, that you can follow, and then also, learning how human nature is and adapting to it. So, we had talked about the Wi-Fi jammers and how those work. But on the other side, it's kind of going back to basics too, trusting, when you're missing free throws, go back and practice free throws, is kind of the concept that I'll take. And that just comes into, learning about your people, having a standard procedure for checking your perimeter as you go through your day and as you start your day to see if people are watching or doing that type of counter surveillance. Because what we have seen is people are installing cameras that are the cellular cameras that look like landscaping equipment in neighboring businesses so that they can monitor what people are doing. So just having that types of checks and balances will really go to play to your advantage.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I'll just add one comment. I think, and this is exciting, the world we live in terms of AI and technology and how it's evolving every day. I think there's applications that apply to the security world around, I think Aaron mentioned, around facial recognition. You could argue both sides of it, but I think it's important to know that technology exists. How we choose to deploy it is individually up to the stores and the owners and the like, but the technology's there. AI will help eliminate, time. If you're looking for an event or you're looking for an incident, or you're looking for something, it just cuts that time down significantly. The ability to do research, law enforcement, investigators, things of that nature. But I think leveraging technology within reason, and finding the right solution providers to match what your expectations are is super important. And then there's things that are, tried and true, having the right safe, having the right, glazing on. Those things are not technology driven as much as they are just driven by, best practices that are industry proven to work. So I think you have to have a balance of emerging technologies and traditional security posture that combined together, I think is a winning combination.
Great. Okay. Those are the questions we have. Are there some things that maybe we didn't ask you that you want to hey, let me remind you about this? Is there something else?
So sorry, go ahead,
No,
Howard.
go for it. Go for it.
I know we're talking a lot about security and a lot about criminal incidents. One of the things that I want to highlight is this is a winnable scenario, right? Implementing correct strategies and doing this, you can definitely still beat the criminal element as they get more sophisticated. It's just taking the time to prepare.
Yeah. I would leave one last comment. Product, and I say this with all due respect to store, you can replace product. You can, if you have insurance, your employees and your team and your whomever, that is the most important asset. So while we're talking about security, but have a practice or a mindset around safety and keeping your team safe and keeping your people in the store shopping, your customers, your employees. I think it's not overlooked by any means, but it's sometimes, we think about all these kind of protocols we want to put in place. The most important thing to say is that in a situation, daylight or whatever the case may be, product can be replaced. You need to make sure that you take care of your teams and put them in safe environments, whatever that looks like on the front end of keeping them safe. But on the back end, in the event that there is an incident, that needs to be reiterated to your team. There's nobody here that needs to be a hero. Let's make sure we put that in perspective. We want everybody to go home at night when the doors close and come back the next day to shop or work, whatever the case may be. So I just want to reiterate that, which I think is, I think there would be no one who would disagree with that.
Right. No, that's great. Okay, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Well, I think Aaron wanted to, or Aaron, you added your last final point. Yes, thank you. Well, Howard and Aaron, thank you so much. This has been a good discussion. And thanks to our sponsor, the Gemological Institute of America. As a reminder, our guests can still type questions into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of their screens. I'm going to get to those in a minute. We've had a couple come in, and we had quite a few actually submitted beforehand. I'm going to give people a couple minutes to enter some more questions. In the meanwhile, I'm going to say a word about our sponsor. This webinar is brought to you by GIA, the Gemological Institute of America, protecting consumers and supporting the global gem and jewelry trade since 1931 through research, education, and laboratory services. Okay, now let's get started with our listener questions. So I'm going to ask one that came in during the course of the discussion and combine that with one that came in before the webinar. And that is, if you think something is fishy, if you think your store is being cased, should you call 911 or should you call the substation, the police substation that is closest to you? Which do you think is going to be the quickest and the most effective? And Aaron, I'll start with you on this one.
I have no problem with calling 911 on that, right? If you think about it from the perspective of you think that you might be getting robbed, I would rather use an emergency line rather than a non-emergency line to get someone there. So I have no issue with using 911. Also knowing that if you do it every day, that's going to be something that gets recognized. So, if you're doing it a few times a month or a few times a year, versus every single day, that is going to be viewed by dispatch in a certain way. So, but I have no problem with that.
Okay. Howard, any thoughts on that?
I may have a little different point of view, which is always good. I think when you look at, I think to Aaron's point, law enforcement and utilizing an emergency number, I think you have to have be diligent
be-
around when you use that, because resources are very limited in law enforcement. And while we want to make sure we're getting the response we need, it needs to be balanced by what the risk is. Somebody's in your store and they think what I think you may use the word fishy or suspicious. Like, in my opinion, I'm not sure I would pick up the phone and call 911 for that. I would make sure that you have other elements that combined together lead you to believe that. So I would just say, and I'm not saying never call 911. I'm saying use good judgment when you do that, because what we don't want to do is take resources away from things that are not that they're less or more important, but it could be used elsewhere. So just have a good balance and train your team around that as well. I think it's important to have balance.
Yeah, you don't want to be the store that cried wolf, so to speak, that's calling
Yeah,
911 all the time. Because as Aaron
correct.
noted, that's going to be recognized.
Yep.
I think that one thing you can do also is to have like a safe word or a code word inside your store, because what criminals will do is they're going to try to separate you so that there's not multiple people watching. And if you have that type of a safe word and
That
you
says
can
like this
raise,
person in the store, alert, alert, this person is suspicious, everyone on alert, and everyone stay in the front.
well, or just, hey, through conversation, if you're getting a weird feeling about something and you have an
Okay.
established word in your
Banana.
step,
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry.
Like banana, just something that kind of
Yes,
is
that
yeah.
alerts the person next to you that something is not right. That I think is key.
That's a good point. Okay, we had a question that just came in that I think is a really good one, and I don't believe we touched on. Can you talk a little bit about driving home after work and being followed? Security after you leave the store and at home is a big deal for jewelers. We just had a really tragic case in the Detroit suburbs. I'm sure everybody read about it. It was awful. It was a home, and men had posed as employees of the gas company and gotten their way into this jeweler's home, and they killed him, and it was awful. So can you talk a little bit about, I know JSA always recommends like taking a different route home, but can you give a little more color about driving home after work and being followed, and also being safe in your home?
Yeah, I can take a first pass at that. I think the JSA's guidance is spot on around how you go about. We're all creatures of habit. I know how I go from point A to point B. It's the only way I know to go, so I go one way. But changing that up and thinking about different routes as well as different times. The store may close at 9 and everyone leaves at 9:02. But think about it from that standpoint in terms of the time coming and going, how you manage kind of your routing. Think about your surroundings when you're driving, who's in front of you, who's behind you, things of that nature. And then I think, not to instill fear, but there's also this element that I think that Aaron mentioned around, using the bad element is using technology to track and see where individuals are going. So do a cursory check of your vehicle, your home, your briefcase, whatever you travel with, because it's not too out of the possibilities of somebody dropping an air tag in someone's briefcase, and then before you know it. So I tell my wife, her purse could be big and have a lot of things in it, but every now and again, just go through it, make sure that no one drops something in there that can track you, things like that. Good practices to have, whether you're in the industry or you're just walking around, things that I would encourage you all to do. And then, look at your surroundings, make sure you're well lit when you're leaving in an area, park in areas that are well lit. I let Aaron talk about maybe the home security aspect of it, but I think the the travel to and from, super important. Many times we put our nose down, we drive because we know where we're going, but lift your head up. Well, hopefully we're doing that while we're driving anyway, but be aware of the surroundings that you're moving into.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think you hit a lot of really good points. A good security strategy for a business includes somebody's home, whether that's management or frontline employees, making sure that you're instilling the technology, the education, and the training so that you can take that back to your house and protect your family. In regards to talking about driving home, in law enforcement, we always talk about taking different routes, like Howard's saying, monitoring who's around you. Sometimes it's just good to change things. We've seen counter surveillance with criminals using upwards of 7 vehicles. And I'm not trying to scare people by saying that, but it's not necessarily just the same car. But change things, have different habits, and then make sure that technology is at your house. And again, using, like Howard's saying, wired technology versus Wi-Fi or cellular is going to be huge. So, and then how you store product and store equipment that belongs to your brand at your house is going to be important as well, because they're going to people are targeting, as you know, jewelers at their homes.
Would you recommend then not bringing anything home from the store, not bringing any jewelry home, not bringing any?
I would
Howard,
highly
looks like you have a
recommend.
thought.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think you're just inviting more opportunity, not just for theft, but loss and other things that, if you, I'm not a jeweler, but I can't, well, I'm sure there's many reasons why you would do that. But to me, I would keep your inventory where it's most secure. You've got the right safe and the right security in your 4 walls. If you're going to an event, use good judgment of how you're managing that, movement of your goods, but it wouldn't be something that I would personally recommend doing.
I'm also going to add here on just kind of the out of the store security. Another good thing to keep in mind is when you're traveling for a trade show, don't tell people if you take a taxi from the airport that you're there for the trade show. I go over this with my staff every year. We're editors. We don't even have jewelry, but
Right.
you could think the cab driver is just making conversation, but that's not necessarily the case. It's not a good idea to advertise what you're there for. And number 2, don't walk around Las Vegas, Tucson, etc. with your badge on.
Right.
Once you get out of the show, put your badge away. Don't be walking up and down the strip with it or around going to dinner. I know sometimes people just forget they have it on, but there's just one more note there. I want to ask one more question here. We got time for one more before we wrap it up. And Howard, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this, but there was a little discussion by someone from Jewelers Mutual about this at one of Jay's multifaceted learning workshops. I think the one in Rhode Island this summer, if I'm not mistaken. What are your thoughts on a fog cannon for protection and to help with smash and grab or store attacks? Can we tackle the fog cannon today?
Yeah, I think that's I won't use the word controversial.
The
I think it's a
fog defender, or I don't know.
highly debated topic, and I'm not here to talk about specific vendor, whatever. I think it's got its place in my opinion, and this is Howard Stone's opinion, around like, use cases for it. And you could argue, and maybe Aaron could jump in from a law enforcement perspective of what you're doing, creating an environment where you're eliminating or minimizing the visibility for law enforcement in a response during daylight hours, right? If you have this.
I'm sorry, Howard, I'm going to jump in real quick. I think maybe we need to explain first what the fog cannon is, because I think maybe not everyone has heard of it.
Sure.
Sorry, I should have.
I'm not a technical expert in it, but from a layman's term, it creates an environment where it puts like you said, a fog in a very short amount of time in a highly concentrated area, depending on the level of square footage and all that. But I believe that the intent is to reduce the visibility for criminals to be able to see what they're doing, whether it's in a showcase or in a store front. So I think that there's 2 sides to look at that. I think from my perspective, it has more application when your store is not open. In the event that specifically what we're talking around with these vault and safe attacks, to me, I think that could be a good use case for it. But I think it's really, from my standpoint, a jeweler should balance everything that they're thinking about security, safety, and make an educated decision for their store. I think to your point, I think if you ask, 100 people in the industry, there may be different points of view on it. I have my own personal opinion. I don't know, Aaron, if you want to respond from a law enforcement or previous law enforcement, that may be a good perspective to add as well.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to this specific topic, knowledge is power with law enforcement. If there is a situation that could turn from, criminals on site when law enforcement arrives, that becomes, a potential hostage situation. And if you don't have visibility, that's going to limit what knowledge goes to law enforcement. Specifically speaking about this product, I don't have anything different to say outside of what Howard is saying, but I will say from a law enforcement perspective, give them the tools and invest in the equipment that will aid investigations. Things that catch clothes or, help criminals leave blood behind. Those are good investments in security strategies, albeit takes maybe a year to get your DNA back. But you know what? At the end of the day, you get an identification off of that over limiting if you had to choose between the two.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to ask one more question, actually, Aaron, since you brought up the having the proper equipment. What kind of 3M glass coating do you recommend for cases and windows? Someone who wanted to know.
Yeah, I mean, I know that 3M is developing further to make it thicker. The film, in regards to specific, measurements, I always like to go with the thickest because it slows them down. I've pulled a lot of DNA off of shattered glass with 3M film. I highly recommend that. But in regards to specific measurements, I don't have a specific number for you on that, but thicker is going to be better because it slows them down, and slowing them down is going to buy law enforcement time to get there, or for you to keep your employees safe.
Howard, any thoughts before we leave off today? Glass coating.
Yeah, I would say similar. I'm not quoting a gauge, but I would say talk to whoever it is that you purchase it from. But the more important thing to think about is how it is installed. In my opinion, putting this type of laminate over glass is not a do-it-yourself installation. Many times what I've seen is a jeweler may purchase it at from a vendor, whomever, then they put it on themselves. If it's improperly installed, actually what happens is the reverse of what you want to happen. The glass could come off in one piece versus in preventing it from happening. So making sure that you have it properly installed, to me, super important, because like I said, improperly installed, it could work in reverse of what you want it to work on a showcase, if that makes sense. So
That's a
having
great
a
tip.
trusted vendor that does this. It can't be the person that tints windows on vehicles. You want to make sure you bring in a right vendor to do this, because it's, to Aaron's point, it is a tactical front line of defense, to slow down individuals. And if it's done properly, I think it's a really key tool in our toolbox to fight around eliminating crime or not eliminating, but minimizing the crime in your store and the loss.
Now, that's a great point. Thank you so much, Howard. We're going to end it there. Howard, Aaron, Regina, thank you all so much. Regina, you did a great job hosting. And thanks again to our sponsor, GIA, and all of our attendees who joined us today. My next question is going to be back next month. It's going to return on Tuesday, December 10th, and it's going to be our annual year in review episode. It's going to be me and the other National Jeweler editors. There are the details on that, and there'll be more information up on this webinar on the National Jeweler website shortly, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, stay safe, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Howard.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.